happen. They can still remain independent and pretty much do what they've always been doing.
I'm rooting for the ACC just for the hysteria. Can you imagine if it broke tomorrow morning that Notre Dame has put in papers to join the ACC and they're just going to partner up and expand, and they're just going to pilfer some other schools, and they're like, we're coming back. We're building this thing. Like, that would be hilarious. Like, Notre Dame could throw a huge wrench in this if they wanted to. They were just like, the ACC was good to us. They let us play in the conference in 2020. We're obviously in it for every other conference or every other sport. Like, we'll just go ahead and do that. And everybody else is like, oh, whoa. I don't know if this is a strong take, but I think Stanford and Cal end up in the Big Ten in the next week. And then I think Washington and Oregon end up in the SEC in the next week. I think both schools end up in the SEC.
See, I'm rooting for for one, we know something's going to happen tomorrow because that's just what happens.
That's what happens
with
on
our
this show.
Mm-hmm. But I'm rooting for the ACC because I think the healthiest version of college football would be like 4 16-team conferences or something.
And that's still in play, folks. Like that, we should say.
But SEC and Big Ten are at 16 right now. So it's like they can't really add anybody for that to necessarily stay put. So I feel like the ACC feels like they're on solid ground. If they could, maybe they want to add some teams from the West Coast, or maybe they, wanted to add a Kansas or a Kansas State or something, Oklahoma State. I don't know. But like if they could just get a couple good brands in their conference, there's a chance that they can hold on. But it's like if a couple start getting poached away, if like Florida State and Clemson get, especially, I think that was a good point you made, Sam. Like I've seen the Big Ten flexing that now they have the 3 biggest TV markets in the country with New York, Chicago, and LA. Like it only makes sense to try to just extend down to Miami and Florida State too. I think that would be a game changer. Not only for the Big Ten and who's conference supremacy, but also like if the ACC loses Florida State and Miami, I feel like the conference is done. It's like I feel like that's like the chink in the armor, and now the floodgates could open. And Virginia Tech, Clemson, it's all up for grabs after that. So I'm rooting for the ACC just because I could see a version where we have maybe a merger with the Big 12 and Pac-12. They kind of take. I don't know who takes who, if the Big 12 is consolidating with the Pac-12 or if the Pac-12 is consolidating the Big 12. But I could see a version of the playoff because I think the playoff is going to 8 teams regardless. And so I think a version of the playoff with 8 teams and 4 automatic bids, I just feel like that's a healthy version of college football. And it's like because 4 automatic bids from these 4 major conferences, like you're not worried about the AAC or the Sun Belt getting on my automatic bid. I think the big time conferences could sign on to that better. So I'm not necessarily optimistic that that's what's going to be, because it's starting to look more like we're going to see the just 24 team conferences in the Big Ten and the SEC, and it's just the NFC and the AFC essentially.
Yeah, I don't think that's necessarily like healthy for the sport, for the long-term health of the sport, is to have these big super conferences, I guess. And even with like, Florida State specifically, I mean, if there's a way to make it work in the ACC, I mean, there's definitely advantages to being in the ACC. I just don't, with the financials, it's almost like it's too big it's insurmountable. Like if they have an opportunity to leave, I mean, you don't really have a choice. You have to take it. And I don't think it's if you had all these healthy conferences, it would be great for the sport. I mean, I think having a healthy Pac-12 is healthy for the sport, but that's not going to exist without USC and UCLA. So,
yeah, the more I think about it, I remember there was a few years ago, there was the rumor about Texas and Oklahoma going to the Pac-12. Like, I almost wish that would have happened. It feels like that could have created a more balanced, like 4 regional, kind of just power conferences or something. Mm-hmm. But I don't know, with the SEC just being as stacked as it is, it's hard to envision more than just 2 power conferences. And like you said, I don't really know if that's what we want for college football. And Notre Dame, if like you said, if Chase, if the Big Ten, because that's who I felt like Stanford and Cal were the teams that were getting left out, along with Oregon State and Washington State. Those seem to be like the 4 that.
Well, the reason I think they get thrown in is scheduling. I think you have to have some other. USC and UCLA cannot be the only West Coast teams in the Big Ten. That cannot happen. So I think
That's
they're
a good
gonna.
point.
I don't see a path where that's the case. They have to have some local games. They have to have some close games. Yeah.
Well, and you would have Stanford and USC in the Big Ten. It's like Notre Dame. What are you waiting for? Like you're just not going to be a Big Ten team, but you're going to play Stanford and USC and Michigan and Michigan State and Indiana. It's like absurd. Just join the conference already.
My gut tells me the ACC is going to find something, and I think the fact that the grant of rights stuff exists is going to keep them in play for stuff. Like they have more leverage than the Pac-12. The Pac-12 is the one where I'm like, I don't think they have any leverage to do anything. And I think the fact that the Big 12 is looking at building like the super basketball conference, I think they're going to get those 6 teams, like the Arizona State, Utah, Colorado. They're going to pull. And if they do that, the Pac-12 is over. And at that point, it's over. And then you have a Power 4, to what Matt's saying, where like, I think that's a possibility. I also think we're people who are really concerned where it's like the Big Ten, the SEC will just be all the super conference. What people have to understand is that part of the downfall and what other schools saw about playing an SEC only schedule or a Big Ten only schedule in 2020 was like teams that usually go 6-6, 7-5, we're going 3-9, 2-10, and
somebody's got to lose those games.
Someone has to lose those games, and I don't believe they have the stomach for building as much money as they are going to make in the super conference. You have to have some cupcakes. You have to have the Cals and the Stanfords. Like you have to bring in those teams because it's not going to be Wake. I think Wake's too small, unfortunately, where like they still won't have a seat at the table. But I do think the not premier brands, but the C's and the B's will find their way into the super conference more than folks might expect because Ohio State wants some of them. Like Michigan wants some of them in this conference. You do not want to have a situation where Ohio State has like Penn State, Wisconsin, Michigan State, USC, Washington, or Oregon all in the calendar in the same year. Like they don't want that. Like they have no interest in that. So I think we'll see a lot more of that. And I think the 30 number for each conference is actually more likely than like 16, because I think if we get to that point, they're gobbling up an entire conference basically. And that's probably the ACC if they do that. And they split the ACC 2 ways, Big Ten and the SEC. But I think as of right now, I think we're going to have a 10-year gap. I think the ACC is going to add a couple random teams. I think everyone's adding. So who stays alive? So
who are they getting though? Who are those teams? Like, where are those teams? Are they? I mean,
UConn probably is in. California? So you add for the basketball front. You bring in UConn. You probably bring in, I don't know, USF,
like Memphis or something.
Memphis, like, maybe.
What does that do?
It's not. It's just adding. It's just assets. It's just like adding some people, and you're just like, we're just throwing stuff at the wall. Like Boise might find their way into the ACC. I don't know. Like that would not surprise me if they make a call. San Diego State. Like I have no idea, but I do think that's kind of where it's going.
And I think the Big 12 is going to get a Power 5 school before they're going to get San Diego State or something, right?
Who's available? Who is going to the ACC right now? I don't think they can pull a Power 5 school.
Really?
No, I don't think they can.
I think the teams we haven't really talked about the most, who I kind of think could be the dominoes to kind of just keep the whole thing going, is Oregon and Washington. Like it feels like Oregon and Washington are the only like assets or entities from the Pac-12 that like everybody wants. It seems like no one really, Cal, Stanford, whatever, Arizona State, like no one's really getting excited about anyone but Oregon and Washington. And I feel like if the Big Ten get Oregon and Washington, like you said, to get someone to pair in the West Coast with UCLA and USC, I think that's going to show the SEC like, okay, we can't be done yet. Like now that they're going to Oregon and Washington, now we have to go get Florida State and Miami or whatever the case may be, Duke, North Carolina. Like they're going to do something. I think if Oregon and Washington can stand tall, like and stay in the Pac-12, and maybe the Pac-12 poaches some of the Oklahoma States and TCUs of the Big 12 or something, Kansas, like that's, I think, the only way that the Pac-12 can really survive is if Oregon and Washington don't jump ship. But I think if Oregon and Washington are out, then I think the the boulder just kept rolling down the hill even faster.
Well, I think that's it. Like Oregon, Phil Knight, it's already out there. It's like he wants to be in the SEC or Big Ten. Done. Like that's it. Like that's all I had to see where I'm like the Pac-12's over because Oregon does not want to stay and be the leader of this conference. Like, and if they're out and Washington's out, like you said, Matt, like the conference just can't survive. So I think the Pac-12's out. And then I think the Big 12 survives and become like, you know, what's weird? It's going to be like the Power One for basketball potentially. Like the football season will get through it, but basketball season, like we're running this with Arizona and company and Kansas and the premier brands there. But I don't know. And the ACC is just going to like survive by scheduling luck, basically, where their grant of rights just really worked out. And then maybe a little bit at a time they get pulled apart. Like maybe one school leaves, like maybe Clemson, not Clemson, they're probably the biggest. Like maybe North Carolina and NC State are the only two that dip. They get out and NC State winds up in the SEC and North Carolina, the Big Ten or something. I don't know. I think it will be incremental damage to the ACC. I don't think it's going to be like the ACC implodes, but I think it's silly to believe that all five are left standing like 2 weeks from now. I just don't see how that happens.
Yeah, I don't think it's possible. And like you said, I don't know what this does in all the other sports. Like I feel like this all kind of makes sense in football. We like know there's a clear like hierarchy of who the good programs and good conferences are and everything. Like that's not the case in basketball. Like 64 teams make the tournament. Like you don't even know which conference is the best year in and year out. Like, oh wow, had a little thunder. I don't know if you heard that. But,
got some ASMR going. I like it.
Yeah, so like Gonzaga or something, do they end up in the Pac-12? Like, I don't know. I feel like when you start talking about all the other sports, it feels like all this super conference realignment and everything should almost just be exclusive to football and let all the other sports keep doing what they're doing.
Well, I mean, UCLA and USC aren't moving outside the Pac-10 or outside of basketball and football. The rest of the sports are staying.
Oh, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. See, I didn't realize that. And that makes sense. It just doesn't seem feasible for your soccer team to go to Champaign, Illinois to play
on a Tuesday
game.
And then back to like the traveling schedule for non-revenue sports is crazy. I don't know. Sam, were you about to add something?
It's just that, I don't really know what happens with all that. It's with the basketball. I mean, you can just tell how much like all this stuff is football. I mean, Duke's probably like the biggest basketball brand there is in college basketball, and whether that's like TV or just name recognition, and they're on like the maybe list for what conference they're going to end up in. I think with the ACC though, I think if schools from like North Carolina start leaving, that's kind of when the conference is in trouble, because that's really like kind of that's like the Los Angeles for the Pac-12 is, North Carolina, maybe Virginia schools as well. That's like really like the heart of the ACC footprint. So if North Carolina and Duke or NC State decide they're bouncing, then it's only a matter of time before all the other schools that have options are trying to leave and end up leaving as well.
And to me, Duke and North Carolina seem like a package deal, like with Oklahoma and Texas and USC, UCLA. It feels like wherever they go, they're going to go together. And that's why, like, you're talking about the Big 12 being the premier conference in basketball. Like, the SEC has been a very good conference in basketball the last few years. Add Duke and North Carolina to that, like, that's a premier basketball conference right there.
For sure.
So, and I just, like I've said before, like, Greg Sankey's going to make the sexy moves. Like, the SEC is going to make big boy moves. So, yeah, I don't know what they're going to do, but it's going to be big.
I would say too, and like here's a PSA and like something I feel bad about Pac-12 fans, where Pac-12 After Dark is the thing, right? Like everyone's just like, oh, I got to watch to see what's happening late with a Cougs game or an Oregon State game. And, they're fun. They have their ups and downs, but like ultimately they are a victim of being in the wrong time zone. Part of the issue with the Pac-12 is something they cannot fix, where you can't do the nooner. So they're not on when college football starts. Like right after game day, guess who's not there? The 9 a.m. kicks in Southern California, Cal, Oregon, Washington. And then most folks are pretty tuckered out by the 7 o'clock SEC ESPN game or the ABC game. That's it. They're out. And if you're not on that ABC game at night, or you're not like, the Pac-12, when you look at the television stuff, I'm like, yeah, they're at a disadvantage. Like the Pac-12, it should be harder. There should be a discrepancy because they're in a bad time zone for college football. Like they are in a rough spot where like most people don't watch their games across the country because the most amount of people live on the East Coast in those major cities, like in DC, in New York, in Miami, in Atlanta. They're all in bed, or it's just like they can't watch them at noon when college football is ready to go because it's 9 a.m. over there. So I feel bad because the Pac-12, I think something that's overlooked with that conference is that they were dealt a bad hand by geography and time zones. And I think that's part of it. I think they deserve some, like they made some bad decisions, but like ultimately it was always never going to be as profitable and as many eyeballs as the other main conferences because the time zones just limit what they can be.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a good point. It's just kind of bad luck. And I also, this is just a personal theory that I've had for a few years. And, you don't know if, correlation is not necessarily causation, but I've always thought the biggest appeal that USC had was they were the pro team in a huge market like Los Angeles. And now they got the Rams, they got the Chargers. If USC is a middling conference team, they're not really interested. Like they don't live and die with it. We've seen Knoxville. It's been a while since Tennessee was competing for conference or national titles. You wouldn't know it if you just looked in Neyland Stadium on a random Saturday. Like they pack that place out. Same with Lincoln, Nebraska. Like they pack that place out. They love football. USC is like, the football team's not that good. I got something else I can do.
I mean, Miami's the same way. Like that's something that will always be a problem. It's like, hey, do I want to go to a game and watch 6-6 Miami, or do I want to go on the beach? Like they're Miami Heat. Like they're with LeBron. They're still getting there after the first quarter. They're still getting there fashionably. They're like, we'll get there.
They were
when we get
bouncing
there.
Game 6 of the finals.
Yeah, I mean, it's just it's a different thing. I don't know. That's a tough one. Notre Dame though, Sam. Ultimately, do you think?